Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. It's time to get after some drawers for those cabinets. Stock is all going to be maple. A little side note on that is I couldn't get any maple wide enough locally to do those two file cabinet drawers. So I'm going to have to do a lamination. Not a big deal. I'll be milling these down to a 1/2 inch. I'll be using the Blum hardware, so technically I can get away with 5/8 of an inch. But I'll probably be shooting for a 1/2 inch, but somewhere in that neighborhood will be fine with me. I'm going to rough mill this all today and probably glue up the panels for those bigger drawers and then let them sit and do final milling tomorrow just before I start building the drawers. Construction is exactly the same as it was in the dresser, down to the same hardware, same joinery, same everything, just because it matches in the room. However, the drawer fronts will be different, but we'll get to those. So stay tuned, I'll get some milling done. So I have all the drawer parts, they're milled to final thickness, but not to final size. I'll get that from each cabinet as I go. Blum hardware again, just like we did in the dresser. The only difference is I had to make filler strips for this one that will go in, and I'll glue and pin nail each of those in. And I'll do that as I go along as well. And the reason I have to do that is because I'm not using web frames in this one. So I need some place to mount the hardware. As far as the drawer construction goes, it's exactly the same as the dresser build. And I'm actually going to pull that video footage. Instead of recreating the wheel in a new video, I'm going to pull that footage. So just keep in mind that the drawer size that I'm working on is a little different than what's in here. Construction is exactly the same. But I'll revert back over here when we do the fronts, and because they're going to be a little bit different as well. So that's what's up next. So I've set the fence a 1/2 inch away from the blade, which is what the Blums need for the clearance for the glides. And I'm going to make one pass on each one, and then I will slide the fence over just a little bit, test it in a piece of 1/4 inch ply until that fit is just right, but that'll give me the groove in the bottom. I'm going to do through cuts on all of them, even though it's going to leave a little gap in the front. It's going to get covered by a drawer front, and you're never going to see it. So next up, I'm ready to create the actual joints. And I want all of the dowels to line up, perfectly all the time. So I've created 3 little squares, and I put blue tape on them to label everything as it should be. So this one's marked the bottom, so that's right there. The top, right there. And this one is measured middle, measure from the top. So that comes right there, which actually just splits the difference between those two. I've set up the appropriate bit. In this case, it's 5/16. It's 3/8. And I've measured a center line on here where it goes. And I'm just going to try to drill as straight as I can. And then we'll get these glued in and let them cure up a little bit, and then we'll do the other side. All right, so there's the file cabinet portion of this all done. You see I just went with wingy drawer fronts this time, and they're just 3/4 in square. And I don't know if this camera will show up, but all the joinery, everything is exactly the same as the dresser. The only difference is I went to a wingy drawer front on this, just to introduce a little bit more color. So I'm going to spend the next couple of days probably getting through the drawers on the other one and get it to this. And then we're going to go to work on, going to do these risers real quick and then finish up that top. So there's been a little change in plans. The riser blocks I moved to 2 inches tall instead of 1 inch tall. I just wanted a little bit more room under my chair, and I had that space. And that'll be in the plans, but they're 2 inches tall. So I'm using my picture frame sled to make this because it just makes perfect miters, and there's no sense not to use it. I do have a link for this sled, and I'll leave it in the show notes. So that's what we're doing now. Okay, so to attach them, there's no glue. I just used a square set to my front and back measurement. And then I used a second one to set my side to side measurement and made sure that they were good. Then I used this smaller 1/2 inch Forstner bit to countersink a hole. I'm going to pilot drill it. And then drive a screw. And that's it. That'll hold it in place. The desktop will do the rest. So next up is this top, and this is going to be a pretty massive top. I used the cardboard that came on the mahogany plywood that we used in the side panels on the cases. And it worked really well to make a template this size. Now I've taken this template into the office and put it where it needs to go and verified it's all scribed for the walls, so I know that this is good. I know these lines are really hard to see, but I've used blue chalk all over to give me some cut lines, and I'll cut those with a jigsaw, and then that will give me some smaller, more manageable pieces to start getting milled up and really get a good look at this grain. And I'll bring the camera in closer when I get to that point and show you what I've got for the grain selection. The one thing I do wish I could have got was a wide enough board to cover this whole front with this curve in one board. I just couldn't get any stock wide enough to do that, so I'm going to have one seam on the inside. But I think we're going to do a faux live edge look on the front of this, and I'll show you that when we get there. But for now, let me get this lumber broke down and get it flat and somewhat milled up, and we'll start having a look. So there's the basic layout. Apologies, this thing is just so huge. All the milling is done. It actually took me a couple of days to do the milling. I would take some off of each side and then let that sit for a good while to make sure nothing was going to move. And lo and behold, I have one board here that wanted to bow just a little bit, but I think it's enough I can pull out with the dominoes for alignment when we put it together. And I really don't want to go too much thinner. I'm a heavy 6/4 for the entire thickness of the top. So I've got all my domino locations marked, and I'm going to start gluing these up in smaller chunks that I know will still fit through the planer if I need to do that. And I'm not going to put that on camera. It's such a huge piece. It's going to take me a couple of days to glue all these smaller chunks together. And then I hope I got clamps long enough to get the full thing when it's done. Once everything is glued together, I'll be able to get most of these straight edges with the track saw. Now that curved front, I will have to do that with a jigsaw and then clean it up afterwards. So let me get after gluing up a few panels, and I'll see you guys in a couple of days, and we start looking at this whole top and start putting this desk together. All right, so I was able to get some help wrestling this beast and got it put in the clamps last night. And this morning now I'll go ahead and get this out of clamps and recruit some more help and get it over to the other table and start getting it trimmed and shaped and all that good stuff. So that's next. So the last thing I have to do before finally getting this cardboard off of here and probably out to the burn pile is locate for these two power and USB charger outlets that I'm going to mount in the desktop. I have to keep in mind that rail that's going to support this whole back half of the desktop. So fortunately I have a 2-inch Forstner bit, which is what this needs. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark these locations, and then I'll drill them after the cardboard's gone, after I work on the top. The locations of these are strategic, right where the outlets are on the wall. So that worked out perfect, and the cords will actually tuck behind the cabinets, so you'll never see the cords. The underside of this desk should be very clean. All right, so the last thing we're going to do to this is create a faux live edge on the front of this. I'm going to put a picture up here on the screen and show you a floating shelf that I did to go above this desk, and it was kind of a practice to see how it would come out, and I was actually quite pleased with how it came out, and more importantly my wife loved it. So we're going to do that on the desk as well. We're going to use a power carver. I believe this is called Holy Galahad wheel. I'll look it up and put a link in the show notes. And it's just on a small battery operated grinder. And you don't want to be perfect, right? You don't want to be symmetrical when you do this. It's to mimic a live edge. So I'm going to put all the PPE on because this is messy. And I'll change the camera around a few times and try to give you some close-ups to show you what I'm doing. So now that I'm done with all the carving, I need to get just a little bit of color into it to differentiate it from the top. So the first step in that is I took just some regular rubbing alcohol and I added a few drops of black trans tint dye and a few drops of red trans tint dye. And I don't want to soak this end grain, but I do want to get a little bit on there. So you see what I do is just get it on there, and again, don't try to be consistent with it. Just get some coverage on there, get a little color, because we'll be sanding this back. So it doesn't take long for that alcohol to cure up. So just a couple of minutes, and then I come back with some 120 grit sandpaper, and I sand this pretty aggressively, trying to knock back some of that color. Also, full disclosure, that first coat was a little too pink for me, so I came back and added just some black over the top. So the last step that I do is to actually epoxy this new faux live edge. And I do all that. I do that with live edge anyway, so it was a natural step. But it really pops this out. And then we'll finish the whole piece after I final sanded the top, like I normally would. This will all get a coat of Armor Seal and then several coats of General Finishes waterborne poly. And a couple of runs or drips just isn't a big deal because we still have to sand this whole top. So now I got to just let this sit. I'll give you a close-up view on the way out, but I think that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. We get after it in the final video. We'll get all the finish put on after I do a whole lot of sanding to this. We'll get the finish on. We'll get it mounted in the room. I'm not going to put on film the 2 support rails. For the back, it's just milling lumber. That's all that is. So I'm not going to put that on. So when we crank up this video again, those will already be installed. But I will show you in the room where they are. And yeah, so that's going to wrap it up for this one, guys. And until next time, take care.